Well, good morning and happy Saturday. So today, I think the the book matters. Which book are you using? Okay, so today I'm looking at the Old Testament books listed and compared. I'm still in Mark, and I'm going to get to Mark because it kind of goes to my point here. So you can see all the books of the Old Testament that are in the Orthodox Study Bible, right? Some were removed by the Roman Catholic Church, and further, even more were removed by the Protestant Church. So, this is actually one of the things that started me on my journey to sort of exploring Orthodoxy. Was because, I've been Protestant for, I was Catholic when I was young, and then I was Protestant starting as a teenager. And then all the way to, recently I started exploring Orthodoxy because the history of the church, the Bible was formulated, or it was canonized at the Council of Nicaea in 325, which, I mean, the church was Orthodoxy. That's what it was, right? So for 1,000 years before the schismatic of the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church splitting apart, this was the Bible. Then the Romans changed some, and then again, 500 years after that, the Protestants changed even more. And so, in reading the Bible, I think it's important to make sure that you're reading the version, whether or not you're Orthodox or not, right? I think it's important for people to read the Bible, read the version of the Bible that is complete. And here's one of the points that I found that was really interesting to me. And I've noticed this now both in Matthew and in Mark, and it's about the same story. So if you go to Matthew, I'm going to get to Mark because that's where I'm actually reading at. But if you go to Matthew and you go to check your Bible, right? Matthew 17, which was the transfiguration that we talked about yesterday. Matthew 17, and then go all the way to Matthew 17:21. Well, here's the thing. Most modern Protestant English translated Bibles do not even have a Matthew 17:21. It doesn't exist in their Bible. So the story that's here, I'll read it to you, is about the disciples lack faith, and so Jesus is kind of explaining something to them and through a healing process. And when they had come to the multitude, a man came to him, Jesus, kneeling down to him, saying, "Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic and suffers severely, and he often falls into fire and often into water. So I brought him to your disciples, but they could not cure him." And Jesus answered and said, "O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I be with you? Bring him to me." And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the child was cured that very hour. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, "Why could we not cast it out?" So Jesus said to them, "Because your unbelief. For assuredly I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say this to a mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you." And that's where it ends in most like English Standard Versions, NIV versions, most of the modern versions of the Bible, that stops there. However, Matthew 17:21 says, "However, this kind," meaning this type of demon, "does not go out," it doesn't get expelled or cast out, "except by prayer and fasting." So how important is fasting and prayer to your spiritual life? So that's in Matthew. So I noticed that in Matthew, right? And then I went to, like, as I've been telling you guys, I'm reading in Mark, which is the next book, right, in the gospel. And the same thing, you get to Matthew 9, and you go through and look at Matthew 9:29. And he said to them, "This kind come out by nothing but prayer and fasting." So again, in the New Testament, in the Gospel of Mark, that same story, which is about You had the transfiguration, and then the faithless generation, and it's the whole story about the epileptic having seizures and falling into fire and water, and the whole thing, right? But granted, Mark is slightly different than Matthew, and it reads a little differently, right? It doesn't talk about the mustard seed. It just says Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, and then it says, and he came to the house, and the disciples asked him, why can't we cast it out? And it skips the part in Mark about the mustard seed, but in Matthew it's different. Well, that's because of the different apostles have different perspectives on it, but what's in both is that these kind of demons can't be cast out without fasting and prayer. Okay, so how important is fasting and prayer? And then if you go look at your NIV or your ISB or any of your international, English standard Bibles or whatever, this also is missing. Why is that? Well, I don't know. I don't know the reason why they don't include this in the text. Some of the Bibles I've noticed will put comments that say, "Oh, sometimes this was in here, but it's not in the actual text of the chapter and verse." I'm not sure why that is. I did notice, though, I went and checked the King James version, and in both passages in Matthew and in Mark, the King James version has the part about fasting and prayer being important. So, I think it's important for anybody who is, exploring their faith, that they get the full Bible, get the original, go back, look at the history of the church, the early Christians, all the way through until 1054 AD, were all using this Bible. And so, obviously it was in Greek and Hebrew, but it was this translation that's the most accurate, that has the most information. So anyways, God bless. Have a happy weekend.